All right, so we are at 7:05 p.m. We have returned to open session. So at this time, is there any public comment?
We do have a public comment seat available and there's nobody here.
Okay.
Nobody signed in.
Okay. All right, we can move on to the next agenda item here. Is there a motion to open the budget hearing for amending the fiscal year 2020 budget?
So moved.
Second.
Jim, can you call the roll?
Yeah. Mr. Barsati,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Muirhead,
Aye. They're here.
Mr. Marhall.
Here.
Is that everyone that's here?
I think we should be aye or nay, correct?
Aye.
Yeah. And do we need to call people who aren't here as well, or no?
I can.
I think
just
we
in case.
can note that they're not here.
Okay.
That's
Okay,
sufficient
I'll
as
do that.
well.
All right. I was just asking. I didn't know.
I don't know.
So where were we at? Anybody left or?
It's simply to note that
Oh.
Linda Murphy and Sherry Kleiber are not in attendance.
And
Okay.
I forgot to call Mr. Hunt.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So is there any public discussion, or is there anything to air at this time? All right. If there is not, is there a motion to declare the budget hearing for amending the fiscal 2020 budget to be closed?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Jim, can you call the roll?
Mr. Barsati,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Muirhead,
Aye.
Mr. Marhall,
Aye.
Mr. Hunt,
Aye.
and Ms. Murphy and Ms. Kleiber are not present to vote. Motion passes.
Okay. So at this time, are there any changes or additions to the agenda? All right. If there are no proposed changes, then we can move on to the superintendent's report.
And Dan, I'm just going to share with the community and the full board that I know the board's fully aware that the governor updated his executive order last Friday and requested that at least one member of the public body be physically present at public meetings at this point in time. So tonight, physically present, I'm here as the superintendent and member of the public body, as well as Joel Marhool and Wesley Muirhead, as two of our board members participating physically. The other board members are still participating remotely via Zoom. And we do not think that it's prudent because of COVID-19 to have everybody physically present at this time. So I just wanted to make that clear for the record. And then I will jump into the superintendent's report. So we have, here we are in June, and it's always a good time to look at our student enrollment numbers. So I have student enrollment, projected student enrollment for the 2020-2021 school year listed for the board to see. As the board is fully aware and the community is aware, we do use a student assignment process, an algorithm that allows us to place students both in terms of proximity to their home and also capacity at each of our local schools. At this point, our numbers are such where our kindergarten numbers are about 18 to 20 students lower than they were in the prior year. So when we have done a sort of an initial look at the algorithm and the student assignment process, it's possible that we would only have one AM section of kindergarten at Blythe. Right now, if we were to place children according to the student assignment process, we would have 18 children in AM kindergarten at Blythe. None of our kindergartens are looking like they would be over what has been a recommended class size of 20 students. So It is only June 17th, and it's very possible that more students will enroll. But this is one of the questions we've wondered. Sometimes our enrollment just fluctuates, but also could it be due to COVID-19 and the pandemic, whether it's families don't fully understand that we are open for registration and enrollment, whether or not they are concerned about enrolling their children perhaps. We've been trying to make those communications clear. We'll send out another communication here in June, but right now I did want to point out that our enrollment looks just to like there might be a modification there at the kindergarten level, but again, kind of too soon to tell for sure. But wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. And then the other part of the superintendent's report, I'm actually going to turn it over to Ramesh Nair to give us an update on our construction.
Sure. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I'm happy to report that construction's actually made significant progress since the last month. I'm going to try and show progress over the month in the photographs as well. So this was actually Ames 2.5 weeks ago. And since then, this was when the first floor slab had been poured, the second floor was still waiting, and the roof obviously was still, the deck was just going up. But over the last 2 weeks, we've made tremendous progress, as you'll see in a few seconds. This was the second floor deck being poured out 2 weeks ago. And that's what it looks like today. So we've actually enclosed the building. The roof is actually in construction right now. We've actually put up temporary windows and some plastic so that we can try and get the interior of the building, keep it dry and weatherproof. In the next couple of weeks, we will start installing drywall inside. I'll take you for a flyby in a few seconds to show you the interior of these spaces. It's made tremendous progress. So in fact, they've started the brick as well. With the mock-up for the exterior brick was approved. And this is some of the damp proofing courses that are being applied to the concrete and to the cement block. And this is the other side of this is one of the exteriors of Ames as well. And this is the interior second floor, which is the slab that was poured out a couple of weeks ago. We have the mechanical and electrical working on the rough-ins. They're working on putting in the storm piping, and the mechanical ductwork is going in. We made really good progress here. You can see they're starting to put out the storm lines as well. In fact, today, the staircase that connects the 2 floors is supposed to be being installed as well. So as far as superstructure goes, we're about almost 90% complete. And the interior renovation sections are doing really well as well. So Ames is really catching up very fast with our overall schedule. I think by the next board meeting, I should be able to report that we are either ahead of schedule or very much on schedule. You can see the interior framing starting to take place, electrical rough-ins going in, mechanical ductwork, so making really good progress. They, in fact, will start some of the interior drywall. And based on my conversation with Steve Nyblom, the superintendent, he intends to finish some of the renovation work in the next 3 to 4 weeks and seal off those areas from construction. So that'll be just ready for inspection in about 45 days' time. This is the exterior where they're just about starting the brickwork. As you can see, the brick piles are on site. Within the next 3 weeks, the entire brick facade should be complete at Ames. It's really good, looking good. This is the brick mock-up that we have. We had the architect review the mock-up as compared to the existing building. There were some issues with the color of the mortar, but I believe they were solved today. This is moving on to Blythe. This was demolition at Blythe a few weeks ago. So as you can see, as we exposed some of the structure, we found a number of issues with how the masonry construction had taken place. We had to fix a lot of that before we could commence the new construction portion of it. So out here, you can see more demolition taking place. We actually pulled back some of the roof almost 1 foot to 2 feet back so that we could expose some of the structure, which we have to interface with. That work was actually completed today, and the metal deck on this will be going on fairly shortly, as you will see. Here's the framing in progress. This is the steel structure for the addition at Blythe, and the main structure is up in place. The metal deck is on site. It'll go up in the next couple of days. So this portion will be done, and then we'll pour out the slab, and we'll be able to enclose the structure pretty soon after that. A close-up of that framing in progress. Another picture showing how they detailed out the structural steel. This is the main entrance where we are building the secure entrance. This was, again, 2 weeks ago when we finished the demolition. We found, as you can see, the structure is being held up with a barely sufficient column. And all this has been replaced now, as you can see, with a much sturdier column. We poured out the concrete slab in the front entrance, so all that's required out here is the main storefront that should be arriving on site within the next 2 to 3 weeks. The entry stoop has been placed, but the sidewalk will be torn up later this week and poured in about 2 weeks' time. This is a look at that same main entrance, the secure entrance. Decking is complete, structure is complete. This is moving into the interior spaces. All the interior renovation spaces have been framed out. Mechanical, electrical, rough-ins are complete. Again, Blythe, we made significant progress. It's probably ahead of schedule. We have a little bit of work to do with the rough-ins with regards to the underground plumbing, but this is basically the tie-in to the new addition. So that's why it's lying exposed, but the work will be complete in the next week or so. This is moving on to Central. 3 weeks ago, this is the elevator shaft that was constructed. They had finished the masonry block wall, and this is the waterproofing that had been applied. Again, it shows the mass climber, which was there. At this time, the crane was on site. As many of you noticed, the crane is gone because we finished the masonry shaft wall. It looks like this now. So the entire brickwork is complete, and it's been washed, cleaned. The pad has been poured. The new mechanical unit to serve this is the external condenser for the server room is on site, making good progress. But this is where I would like to pause to show that Central has been a big challenge for multiple reasons. The building is a fairly old structure, and even though DLA has done their best to detail out the existing drawings, we've run into a number of issues with regards to underground structure, to the main structure of the building itself. I will show you a couple of pictures and the challenges we have faced. But again, we're drawing down from our contingency that we had. There's no additional cost to the school district, but Berglund's working within the numbers that was there in the guaranteed maximum. We had, as I'd given the board a heads up last time, that we had a major challenge with the sanitary line, and we had a predicted cost of almost $90,000. But based on the latest numbers and working on a different model, we've reduced that cost down to about $60,000. We've saved about $30,000 by going with an alternate method. This is the framework in one of the classrooms where we are raising the height of the classroom, correcting the levels. You can see it's a full frame that we have to apply. It's a lot of work in there. And this is the new ramp at the first floor level. It's already framed out, it's decked out, it's all ready to get its finished floor. So, and this has passed the inspection. It meets the ADA requirements. So we're in good shape here. This is one of the major challenges that we ran into at the main entrance at Central. There was when Berglund pulled off the ceiling, they found a major section of the upper floor was not supported. The masonry was just hanging out there. It was literally being held together by the mortar that was present. So they immediately applied some shoring to keep it in place. And you can see, so the brown area is the underside of a concrete deck that you see. This is the white portion is also the concrete deck, but in between that, sometime in the past, they just applied some masonry infill without supporting it. It was just being held together by mortar. It would have fallen down if they hadn't applied formwork and shoring up here. So we had Pierce Boris, structural engineer, come out on site, and he has redesigned this section. There's going to be a new beam that's going to be strung along the two edges to support the structure out there, because we don't want to take this out because you don't know what you're going to end up with if you start demolishing the structure. There are other solutions too, but from a cost standpoint and a prudent standpoint, the best way out was to support it structurally. This is, as you can see, we had to bring in an excavator in here for this is the basement level excavation for the ramp. When we start to expose it, we suddenly found there were locations where there was no foundation in this building. The wall was just sitting on stone and mud out here. So we had to introduce some underpinning to support the walls. Once again, there were just huge voids which were found underneath the walls. And it's surprising how these walls hadn't cracked over the years, because I think the size of the masonry was so heavy, it seemed to have held together like it was just the mass that was holding it together. This is when we had finished excavating for the ramp. This is one of the multi-purpose room. It's being framed out. It's ready for electrical and mechanical rough-ins. This is showing how the progress has been made with that rough-in. Now, this is that sanitary line that I was talking about. So when we started to expose it, we found that the slope of the sanitary lines was incorrect, and this requires a correction by introducing a sump pit. The sump pit has to go down almost 12 feet. So it's hard to imagine that this was a classroom, but we've excavated out almost 12 feet, and you have a sump pit that's going to go into this section. This work will be completed by tomorrow. And as they started to excavate, once again, they found there's no foundation in any of these areas. We had to underpin all these walls out here. You can see the new underpinning. You can see the concrete that's been poured. Even along this wall, we had to underpin the entire wall section. This gentleman out here who's doing the demolition, he's actually below grade. He's almost 1.5 feet. The photograph already doesn't show how deep he is in the ground. Moving on to Hollywood. Hollywood is a fairly limited scope. We have the demolition is pretty much complete. There's only one more wall that we have to work with. The masonry demolition was in progress, but the other spaces, the framing is almost complete. The rework for the mechanical and electrical is complete. We're making good progress out here. Essentially, I mean, I think in all the 4 schools, we have done really well. I think the only challenge really has been that trying to keep our costs in line with the GMP. And as I had mentioned previously, trying to save as much money as possible for the school district. We'll have to spend some of our savings to make Central whole, because that has been our biggest challenge. So we may end up spending more money on Central and much less on Hollywood, Blythe, and Ames. But that's the key work. I mean, this is the last bit of demolition that was left for Hollywood. This work will be complete. In fact, when I was there this morning, the mason was there. He was working on this, so this may be even finished by now. Yeah, you can see the masons out there. He's literally demolishing each brick one at a time. So that work's done. So that is the construction update for right now. If any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them.
You know, I have a question, Ramesh.
Sure.
Regarding Central, I know you mentioned that there's some things that we've once you start opening up walls, you sort of see really you can be opening Pandora's box, and there's no doubt that I know you're like, once you open the ceiling, you're fixing the ceiling, so that you're fixing the foundation. But I guess the only way I can look at this is I do an analogy. I redid a kitchen, had a kitchen redone and the electric done fixed. I had quote unquote an outlet fixed, but then it ended up being I had to rewire the entire kitchen because we ended up they found more and more. It's like, okay, just rewire it. I guess based on what you're finding, I mean, it sounds like you found no foundation in 2 sections of the building. I mean, how structurally, I guess, sound is Central? I mean, maybe that's not the right question, but I mean, it just seems like there might be more problems that we're not uncovering because we're not opening up walls.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, previous construction had just abandoned a lot of the underground piping. So when we discovered that, we had to actually test it to make sure it was not live before we demolished it. I mean, we had to find out where does it, the source. The drawings, obviously DLA did not have X-ray vision from 80 years ago because some of these pipes are 70, 80 years old. And so when we exposed that piping, we had to trace it back. So the most of the work out here, the instructions that I've given them really is life safety first. So anything that they encounter with regards to life safety, they have to address. So so it's not like the entire foundation is missing, it's chunks of it was missing. It's like either someone skipped it because they felt that they were on, bedrock or something and they just skipped it. And that's why we have these voids out there. Or it was, I hate to say sloppy construction, but this is 80 to 90 years old, and so we must address those issues to make sure that the building is being built correctly. Otherwise, I think the problem would be if we had skipped this, if we had skipped filling those voids and we had constructed it exactly the way the drawings were shown, Berglund would have been hard pressed to warranty it. I mean, so for right now, if cracks develop, for example, in the new construction areas, Berglund's responsible for it. I mean, so they are required to at least give us the comprehensive warranty that's required as part of the contract. So the least they have to do is to address whatever they uncover. They have to do that. But obviously, from a guaranteed maximum standpoint, they cannot go about exploring, because if they explore, I'm sure they'll find more issues. So we've told them, limit your scope of work, limit it to the scope of work where we are. We're not going on an exploration, mission finding process out here.
No, and I can appreciate that. I guess my question, and this is, I guess, more of a question for the board, is given that we found some significant concern, or given that we found some significant concerns at Central, would it be worthwhile to do some sort of assessment of the building? I mean, if we weren't doing this, as you mentioned, Ramesh, I mean, the ceiling would have eventually collapsed. I mean, that's not something we want to, at Central, it's not something we want to ever encounter.
Right, but the problem with that is any survey that you conduct at this time, without it being destructive like this, there's no way you would be able to uncover it.
Okay.
We only uncovered it because we pulled out the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
We only uncovered the plumbing issue in here because we started to excavate. We were trying to lay out our sanitary line connecting to the new nurse's office, and we found out that the sanitary line does not slope correctly. And then once we started pulling the existing line apart, we realized that the pipe dimensions were all incorrect. You had 3-inch lines connecting to 2-inch lines. It should be the other way around. It should be reducing to the end, not increasing. So we had to correct all those lines, and we've done it to the best of our ability right now. Back to the sump pit, it is correct. So whatever work that's being done is correct. But if you have to go on an investigative process to find out how structurally stable the building is, you would have to start pulling out walls, pulling out the floor. The only way out to expose this was to take the floor out to see that there's no foundation. You can see it right here. The slab, it's not supposed to be supported like this. There should have been a wall, a foundation wall right underneath it. It's not there. So we are going to underpin this whole section. There's only way out is to do it.
To your point, Ramesh, when we look at that wall,
yeah,
there was no exterior evidence of structural damage or risk. It was only when it was uncovered and we say, here's something that should be supported additionally.
That's correct. We would never build something like this structurally in this day and age. What I feel has happened out here is the masonry walls are so substantial. I mean, some of the walls are 18 to 24 inches thick. So I think the mass of that wall acted as a stabilizer. If the wall had been, say, 12 inches thick, I have a feeling you'd have seen major cracks in them. I think just the fact, the mass, the weight, it somehow balanced itself out over we hit clay out here, which is good. And that helped, dissipate some of the loads. So I have a feeling that the structural engineer 100 years ago decided to build right directly on the clay rather than to build a foundation. So we uncover these things, but our structural engineer said we need to correct this if we find it. We can't skip it.
So I wonder how does this get documented in such a way that it's not a surprise the next time around?
So at the end of this project, we have what is called the as-built documents that will be issued by Berglund. That is, they will indicate all the locations where they did work and what work was done. So that becomes a record document for the next project, if ever undertaken. So that would be the starting point. But again, it's limited to the areas of Central where they worked. It does not include work where they did not do any work. So
Martha, on that topic, I know when we started this whole process, there was a question about where the plans and the construction work that was done in 2012 and 2013 that Ramesh was involved in, where they were stored, and there's a lot of like confusion about what exactly who had them and what format they were, and we would look for them, and I think at that point you said you were going to try to create some kind of robust archive so that things like this would go into that, and then 10 years from now, if someone's looking for it, they would find it. Where do we stand with that?
So there has been a process to start digitizing all the records, and actually DLA went quite far back into very early records as well as more recent records. So Jim has been working on that. Jim, do you have additional comments about that?
All the drawings that we had on site were sent to a company that scans them, and then we have access. We can pull anything up online, and they'll get the new drawings when this project's done. So, and we're able to give access to anyone that is going to do work in the future.
Jim, you say access. Do we actually have a copy in our possession? Or are we paying a registration fee every year so that they promise to store this stuff?
I'll check on that, but I think we have a copy of it, but I haven't talked to him since we first did all that. I'll follow up.
Thank you.
We could provide an update just on that process and some of the details at a future meeting.
I guess one point I'd like to clarify one way or the other. So I think at one point David said, or maybe gave the idea, or that ceiling section would have fallen if it were not supported ever. I'm just wondering how accurate that was. I heard it was supported by the mortar. I guess I'm just wondering, I know we've supported it now. I'm just wondering, is that an accurate statement to say it would have fallen if we had not worked on it?
Yes and no. The yes part of it is eventually yes, but would it have fallen tomorrow? No. As I said, the masonry itself, because of the mortar which is holding it together, acts like glue. So there was nothing resting on it that was pushing it down, substantially. If we had loaded it structurally above in the upper level, second floor, there was a potential for failure. Yes, absolutely. But there's no way you would have uncovered it unless you had stripped out this whole portion. So we don't know if there are other portions of the building like this. We just don't know it. It is only because we pulled out the ceiling, because we have construction in the zone, that we found it, and we set up the shoring to support it. There's no other way we would have found it. Because Central has been expanded so many times. So this could have been the exterior edge of the construction at one time. When they built another addition, they added to it, and at the interface, at that time, maybe they missed something. They just added this masonry and infilled it. It's possible. I mean, would it have fallen today? No, it wouldn't have, because you can see it's not coming down. It's just that you cannot expose something like this and say, I'm just going to put back a ceiling and leave it. You can't do that. You have to address an issue when you do renovation work. If there's a structural issue, you must address it. We have to. Go back right there. So yeah, this is, I mean, the day they exposed this, Berglund called us and said that they need to set up a shoring system. The structural engineer came on site the very same day. He advised them as to where to place the shoring, and they placed the beam, and it was done.
Ramesh, there used to be a doorway right there, correct?
That's correct. The door was sitting right, the doorway was almost holding up that section.
And so that's what I'm asking is, what was above the doorway?
You had probably a transom that had been covered up because of the ceiling. The ceiling ran right through. So you didn't see the transom that was there, but that was acting as some kind of support. So as soon as we removed that in the demolition, we just found out that there was nothing holding it.
Right. So to this point, there was something there, maybe not up to
Structural.
today's standards,
Yeah.
but it was there.
Right.
And so I think part of this is as we're changing the structure of this building, we have to address the new loads that we're creating and the new load paths.
That's correct.
So I
In fact,
understand this structural bit that you're talking about. There was basically two different floors were basically next to each other, and there was a crack between them, and they just filled that crack with mortar, and that's what we're talking about, is like the mortar was in that crack as opposed to the entire concrete floor. Is that right? Is that right?
Yes, substantially correct. The only thing is the crack was almost a foot wide.
Okay.
So they infilled it with brick.
Okay, so they infilled
So
brick, and then maybe
brick.
There's only
You can see the brick.
Yeah.
So to Joel's point, the other reason why it probably did not fall right away or did not show signs of stress, there was a doorway out here which was supporting it. Doorway was not structural by any means, but it provided some kind of support out there.
Right.
No cracks developed over the years, and it just stayed in place. As soon as we removed the doorway, we noticed this issue, and it had to be addressed.
But the doorway was not holding up the two floors that were sort of juxtaposed. It was
That's correct.
The doorway was just holding up that 1 foot wide.
It was not even holding up because it was just
providing some support for that.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And so to address this point, we also went and investigated what's happening in the level below us. And the structural engineer said he wants to support that area too. So we're adding 2 beams across, one out here on the first floor level and one on the lower level. So.
And there was a doorway on the lower level as well.
That's correct.
I think the better description is when we open up an old building and change things, we are changing things that we didn't necessarily have exposed. And so once we do see what we're addressing, we have to provide the most current standards.
That's
the way it was previously was not necessarily unsafe. It was, the school's been standing for 100 years without any signs of structural deterioration. And as we change things, that changes the building, so you have to address the new condition, but the old condition is not inadequate.
That is absolutely correct, because there was no signs of cracks in the masonry walls. Even the areas where we didn't find foundations, we did not find any of the walls cracked. It's just that there was a massive void out there which had to be filled. That's the way you would address it. So there's no imminent danger of collapse in any of these things. These were all elements that were exposed by construction.
And to Ramesh's point, past construction tended to rely on mass much more so than we do now, where we try and optimize materials and load paths and everything else. You'll notice that with the Ames construction, that's solely out of concrete masonry units and steel beams and columns. Well, in the past, that it could have been entirely brick. Look at the Monadnock building, for instance.
Yes.
We do things differently now. It's not that the past was necessarily wrong. It's just different. And so our standards of how construction is done have changed.
Oh, I didn't mean to scare anyone or say that the building's unsafe. That was not the point. The point was that we are getting a surprise as part of construction. We're addressing it. That's all it was. It's not to say that the building is in any danger of collapse or destruction. There's no, it's just a defect that we have found. We have to address it. That's it.
Thank you for your explanations, Ramesh.
Oh,
Yep.
thank you, Ramesh.
Sure.
And that's it for the superintendent's report. Thank you, Ramesh.
Sure.
Okay, we will move on. So the next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. So can the board secretary please read the consent agenda?
Yeah. Give me 1 second. My phone as board book is not the ideal mechanism for tonight. Here we go. All right. Tonight's consent agenda consists of minutes from previous meetings, which would be the closed session on May 20th and the regular business meeting on May 20th. The personnel report as presented, administrative vacation days amendment, and payables pre-list from May 31st, 2020, June 17th, 2020, and the 2020 to 2021 school year for the West 40 Regional Safe Schools contract.
Okay. So is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
That would be Joel.
Second. David. moved
Okay.
it. I'll second.
Okay. All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So does any board member wish to remove any items from the consent agenda?
No.
All right. Just remember, this is not a touch screen. Sorry about that. Might have been here all night. Kathy, can you call the roll, please?
Okay. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Okay. Mr. Marhall?
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Murhead?
Aye.
And Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes.
All right. The next item is the superintendent contract approval. Is there a motion to approve the superintendent's contract as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Joel.
Is there any discussion?
I think the discussion is that we believe this is a fair contract to the district and the superintendent. It's gone through legal review on both sides, and we look forward to working with the superintendent for another 5 years.
Indeed, yes. Martha's been with us for a while now. We're definitely familiar with her work and definitely very appreciative of her work, and look forward to continuing to work with her for the next 5 years.
Ditto.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right. If not, Kathy, can you call the roll?
Okay. Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Okay. Mr. Marhall?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Muirhead?
Aye.
Okay, did I forget anybody? And Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay. 1 second here. Excuse me. Okay. Next on the item, Riverside Education Council. Anything from that tonight?
Doesn't look like, no one's here and there's been no additional comments.
Okay. All right. Then next is board member comments. Anybody been to a play lately or a musical?
No, maybe I shouldn't admit this publicly. I didn't watch the talent show, but we did a virtual talent show at Ames that I know.
Oh, really?
I heard some good feedback from it. I got to sit down and watch it. But yeah, everybody sent in video clips and they put them together and kind of sent them out. And pretty cool idea.
Yeah.
The other thing I saw was a Landmark article. Actually, they had wrote up back at the end of May about the Best Buddies program, and it highlighted the Riverside Brookfield program, and then talked about the one here at Central, which we had done a presentation with, I think maybe the meeting before last or something. First year, really big, got a lot of involvement with it, and it just kind of neat seeing that stuff kind of get pushed out there in the public in more mediums than our board meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Those are both great things. Thanks for bringing those up. All right. Anybody have anything else?
And no, to Wesley's point, there was Hollywood did something similar as well, and there's actually a really cool one where they have sort of very appropriate for our day and age, or I guess for our times, is that they had like some of the second graders actually looking like they were throwing toilet paper each other across rolls of toilet paper across to each other, and then they spliced it together.
That's pretty good. Pretty cool. Video editing and camera phones give you a lot of capabilities these days. That is great. Anyone else? All right. If not, we will move on to committee reports. Dave, is there anything for the policy committee this evening?
There is not, but there will be next month. So we got a couple more policies that we're going to just be reviewing, but nothing like last time.
Just a couple, huh?
Well, more than a couple, but you can never just do two.
They come in packs of threes at least, I guess. All right. So then we'll move on to the facilities committee.
We are saving our conversation for the new business.
Okay. Then finance committee.
Nothing to report at this time.
Okay. And personnel?
Nothing at the moment.
Okay. And Sherry is absent, so nothing from the education committee. All right. So then the next item on the agenda is old business. And this is the presentation of the fiscal year 2020 legal budget amendment. Is there a motion? Go ahead.
Sorry.
Were you waiting on me, Jim?
I was going to start to present, but I think you're going to start with a motion first. So
yes, there's a motion here. So. All right.
So moved.
So is there a motion to approve the 2019-2020 legal budget amendment as presented?
So moved.
Second.
All right, Kathy, can you call the roll?
Okay,
We
Mr.
have to discuss it first.
Oh, you're right. I apologize. I'm completely off there.
Or have it presented first.
Trying to cut Jim out of the whole thing.
Goodness gracious. Yeah, I guess so. Jim, you were right to jump early.
Oh, it's the same as last month, that when we change our planned spending dramatically, like over 10% of the original budget, and we managed to do that this year when we added the construction. So when we had put the budget together in September, the one that was approved did not include the construction until we kind of fine-tuned the numbers. So anyhow, when you change your planned spending, you need to amend your budget. This takes care of that requirement. It adds approximately $10 million that we're going to spend this year on the capital projects. The rest will fall after July 1st. So we'll have some big spending there also. And there was an adjustment that we also made in federal grants that wouldn't have required this, but since we're doing the amendment, why not fix that at the same time? So those are the changes and why we're amending.
What was the federal grant change, Jim?
About $98,000 over 3 different grants. And it was money that wasn't spent the previous year. So when we were budgeting, we budgeted a lower amount. We didn't spend all the money the previous year. So fortunately it rolls over and we get to spend it this year.
That's a nice surprise. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's on both sides, revenue and expenditure. So it still balances.
Okay. Any further questions for Jim? All right, if not, now, Kathy, can you call the roll?
Okay, Mr. Barhal.
Aye.
Okay, Mr. Barsadi,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Muirhead,
Aye.
and Mr. Hunt.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay, next up is the Teamster agreement. Is there a motion the Board of Education approve the Teamster agreement as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
For Mr. Fitton to just, for the public to just kind of review the main terms of this agreement.
Sure. First, I want to thank the custodian union for their efforts. We met probably 4 times in person and another 3 times virtually to get this worked out. It's a 1-year agreement, almost like an extension of the previous contract, but it's 1 year in duration. And overall, it's about a 3% increase for the custodians, which is within the parameters of what we've projected in the last time we updated our long-term projections.
With maybe I might just add, like, the main intent here is just with everything being so unknown, we started with a longer term contract, but with everything going on, we basically just said, let's try to roll this over to next year when we've got hopefully a better understanding of what's going on. So this will be on the table for next year again, right?
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks to Jeff and Wes for bringing those points up. All right, is there any further discussion? All right, if not, Kathy, can you call the roll?
Okay, Mr. Barsadi,
Aye.
Mr. Marhal.
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Muirhead,
Aye.
and Mr. Hunt.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay, next item is the take 2. Next item is the strategic planning recommendation. Is there a motion that the board approve the agreements with the Consortium for Educational Change strategic planning process for 2020-2021 as presented?
So moved. Second.
Okay, is there discussion on this, or Martha, is there anything to present?
Sure, I can share with you. There's a memo there with the recommendations. So the board had met with 2 different groups, Capacity Unlimited and Consortium for Educational Change, way back in early March, which now seems like a really long time ago. But through informal conversation and considerations on my part as well, it felt prudent to move it forward with a recommendation specifically for Consortium for Educational Change. I think we all had some confidence that both groups could do a very nice job in engaging the community and helping us move forward with our long-range planning. I think Consortium for Educational Change, especially being local, and again, I had shared that I had experience with both groups and would have very comfortably and favorably worked with either group. But I think this is a great decision for the district. They've worked with a lot of other districts in our area, in our region, and I know them. I know that they will do a great job. They are certainly well aware that we are all in the midst of a pandemic, and this idea of long-range planning is even more daunting. But I think as we sort of plan for the plan, and we actually have some tentative meetings set up for next week to engage 2 board members in that process. Dan and Wesley have agreed to join us for some of that. And one of the key conversations will be some conversation about timing, is when is the right time to get this started. We do know, though, that continuous improvement and growth, even in the midst of a pandemic, is still part of the work that we want to do and want to do together. So I think this is an important recommendation, and appreciate the board's support on moving forward with the process, even though we may do it slightly differently than we might have planned pre-pandemic.
And I might just add, I'm kind of excited about this too, because sounds like we're on track, or back, we'll be done with facilities, which was the primary focus of the last 5 years. So it kind of shows on track with that 5 years, and really get back to, our core objective with education, stuff like that. So getting the insights from this group and what other school districts have done, and really putting us on a good path, I think will set us up very well. Like, just kind of reiterate what Martha said, just because we're in the middle of all this going on doesn't mean we don't think about the future. So getting this set up and on track will hopefully help us stay moving forward and hit the objectives that we want once we're through all of this, hopefully relatively short-term time period that we're in. So.
Anything else? Okay, if not, no, was that a no?
Yeah, that was no. Sorry, Dan.
Yeah, that was a no. We can go through this all night.
Sure, if you want to. I'll let you lead it off.
Who's on first? All right. Kathy, can you call the roll?
Sure. Mr. Marhall?
Aye.
Okay. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Murhead?
Aye.
And Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay, next agenda item is new business. The first is the COVID-19 update and future considerations.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We do have a presentation, and I know Jim Fitton, Don Tefano, Angela Dozel, and Pam Shaw are all going to share part of the presentation with me here tonight. We felt it was important to update the board and really the entire community around the planning that we are in the process of doing related to COVID-19 and looking ahead. We will do a brief look back. I think people are well familiar with that, but let me go ahead and share my screen. And not lose board book.
Okay, we can see your screen.
Are people seeing the? All right, so as we shared, we are doing a bit of a looking back and looking ahead here, but I think people are well familiar with the timeline that we started really last March 16th and moving toward, on March 18th, remote learning for all students in District 96. There's some really important key points there around how we distributed.
There's some
I don't mean
feedback.
Yeah. Is there too much feedback?
I'm wondering if Kathy's computer is that muted?
Let me check.
All right, let's see if that's easier
Oh.
or sounds better, certainly.
Yeah.
So here's
Yeah.
our timeline. Oh, it does sound better. It sounds better even in this room too. So thank you for pointing that out. Again, starting on March 18th, all of our students in District 96 moved into remote learning, and really just want to continue to appreciate the work that this community did, that our staff did, in making sure that children had devices, that parents were home with children and supporting their learning, and that our teachers made this very rapid shift to really being teachers through a remote learning platform, something I don't know that any of them ever fully imagined other than perhaps for a snow day here and there. So again, really significant changes, and work that we're proud of, but work that we also know that we need to think about in terms of how we can get better at doing it if this is to continue. And that's certainly the ambiguous question still in front of us, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I just want to, again, just do a quick point out of the many things that were happening in the district in the midst of all this past spring, including lunch distribution on a regular basis to all of our families that needed healthy lunches to be provided. Again, partnering with our parents, that is something that we always believe in education, and I believe it was a great moment in terms of the necessity and the importance and the value in doing it that way. I believe our communication from both the district office as well as from our principals was really very significant in terms of we were sending out weekly parent communication from the district office, and I know principals and teachers were communicating very, very regularly. We also had an opportunity to connect very regularly with our staff. We actually used this format, the Zoom webinar format, to connect with staff weekly and just give them updates in terms of what was the understanding at the sort of state, local level about the pandemic and about shifts and changes in student learning. And I think that was valuable. But overall, again, just people did a lot to prepare and pivot and collaborate. We have talked a lot about the value of teachers collaborating and sharing their best practices with each other and to make sure that everybody is indeed implementing similar high quality practices. And the pandemic certainly brought that into a very clear focus. And I think, again, an area where our teachers really did a great job in terms of connecting and collaborating with each other. I know Wesley and David, you both pointed out some things about the remote talent show. We had a virtual 8th grade graduation. We did a virtual retirement celebration for our retirees. And I know there were many other sort of dance-offs and field days, et cetera, et cetera. But again, I think there was a lot of creativity with the clear goal of keeping families and students as engaged as possible through all that. So again, a thank you through that process. But we know that really the most important part of this was making sure that our students were engaged and participating in remote learning as much as we could make happen. And Angela has some of the data on what our student engagement looked like. So Angela, do you want to take it over next year, and I'll mute?
Yeah. So what you'll see in these next two slides are just the data for student engagement during the remote learning period, which was about 30 days once we started recording student engagement. We tracked student engagement based on connections that we were making with students and families, between teachers, administrators, and those students and families. As you can see between these two slides, most of our students were engaged for the majority of the remote learning period. You'll see a number of students at each school who were not engaged for 1 or 2 days out of the 30 days that we tracked. And you'll see that each school has a group of students who were not engaged for at least 2/3 of the remote learning period. But what's important to know is that the principals, the social workers, the psychologists were all working together to reach out to these families because we wanted to ensure that they were safe and that at least their basic needs were being met, even if they weren't engaged in the learning. You are, go ahead and go to the next
Quick question on that. So what is the definition of engagement? Like a virtual class, or like a 1 day of not submitting assignments, or what's the best way to interpret that?
So engagement for this remote learning period, and remembering that we were working in terms of emergency remote learning instruction rather than preparing in the event, like how we might be preparing in the event that we return in the fall to remote learning. So in the situation we were in, engagement was any type of contact or connection. It could be phone call, email, work completed, attending virtual sessions, any of those things where you had contact during that day with a student or their family.
Okay, and so if there was 0 contact, that was considered a day of not engaged?
Correct.
Okay.
So as you're aware, we gave, at the end of the school year, at the end of May, we gave 3 surveys: a student survey, staff survey, and a parent survey. Here you see in front of you some student survey results. The student survey was released to the students on Tuesday, May 26th. And as of Friday, June 12th, 400 students had responded to the survey. You see here a breakout of the schools that the students attended, as well as a breakout of grade levels that responded to the survey. It's important to note a few things. 62% of our elementary students, from their comments, 62% of elementary students rated the remote learning experience as some days being better than other days, and 69% of our Hauser Junior High students rated their remote learning experience as some days better than other days. And so that's 62% of the combined 3rd through 5th grade numbers and 69% of the combined 6th, 7th, and 8th grade numbers. A number of our elementary students said that some days were harder than others. They missed going to school, but remote learning wasn't bad. They missed their friends. Both grade levels said that it was a stressful time and it was hard working at home because there's so many distractions. Hauser Junior High students also said that some days there were a lot of work and other days there was not a lot of work. So there was a bit of inconsistency in the amount of work that they were given. They said some assignments were confusing and hard to understand. They missed their teachers and friends also. And what came out of the survey is that it was hard that our junior high students felt it was hard sometimes to ask questions because the response time wasn't that immediate response time they're used to with in-person learning, or it wasn't as fast as they needed to be able to complete an assignment. So that was a challenge for them during the remote learning period, as well as, again, the number of distractions. With our parent survey, we released the parent survey on Friday, May 22nd. And as of Friday, June 12th, 158 parents had responded. And the way the survey was set up, it was set up so that parents could respond about the experiences of individual students, given that some families may have students in junior high, some family, as well as in the elementary schools. So wanted to break it up so that they were able to talk about the experience at the different levels. So 158 parents responded, about 268 students. That chart will show you the number of students per grade level whose experiences were discussed. You can see that our primary level, we had more students' experiences discussed, and then it decreases as the kids get older. A couple of things about the survey results for parents. Over the course of the remote learning period, from the beginning in March till the end in May, there were 3 surveys that were given, and each survey ended up being developed a little bit more. But the one question that remained on all the surveys was the overall workload. In the first survey in March, it was given as a whole group, K through 8. It wasn't broken out by elementary students and Hauser students. And so when it was given as a whole group, 80% of our parents felt that the workload was just right. And then when we regave the survey in May, we gave another survey in April. That number was still combined, elementary and junior high. But the percentage of parents that felt the workload was just right had decreased to 63%. And then you can see at the end of the remote learning period, when parents evaluated the workload over the course of the whole period, you can see how it's broken up for elementary with 67% feeling it's just right, and for junior high with about 54% feeling it was just right. So that is, as we continue to have conversations about next year, should we go into a remote learning period, whether it's a hybrid or it's fully remote or anything of that sort, that's a conversation that we'll continue to have on how to balance that workload. This survey also talked about real-time connections, the frequency of them, something that was also discussed on the April survey. And in the April survey, again, it wasn't broken out between elementary and junior high. But in the April survey, 10% of our staff members had no real-time connections, 57% had 1 to 2, and 18% had 3 to 4, 15% having 5 times. So that was in April. And now you can see when it's broken out between elementary and junior high, where we stand with real-time, where we stood with real-time connections by the end of May. At the elementary level, you see that the majority of our staff members were having real-time connections with students 1 to 2 times. And at the junior high level, you can see that it's kind of a even split between 0 times and 1 to 2 times, with a chunk of teachers doing it 3 or 4 times and 1 or 2 doing it 5 times a week. And then also talking about the amount of real-time connections with parents, seeing if they thought it was too much, just right, too little. You can see at the elementary school, there's a small group that thought it was too much, but for the most part, it's kind of divided almost equally between just right and too little. We see at Hauser that a number of parents felt that the real-time connections at the junior high level was too little. And so that is, again, as we talk about next year, should there be a remote learning period, that will be a conversation that will need to happen as well. With parents, real quick before
two questions on the parent part. The number of families that responded seemed a little bit low, but what was the total survey count that went out? Like how many parents were asked for feedback?
It was sent out. It was sent out through all district communication, so it went out to all families.
Which would be, I mean, do we know what?
I don't know.
From,
I don't have the exact count of families, you know, obviously 1,700 students approximately, and I don't have the exact family count. I'd have to
okay.
get that.
I was just wondering what the response rate was on that.
It's about I would guess 2 students per family on average, I would guess.
Yeah, roughly. Although I know a fair amount of families with 3 and 4 kids, so it might be a little lower than that. But I was on this slide, I was a little surprised. So when I was looking at this earlier, the one before this, and then to this one, there was like 30-something%, which had 0, which probably led to 70% saying too little. I was just curious, any thoughts or knowledge around the 0 contact? I was a little surprised to see it that high at the junior high level.
A number of junior high teachers offered it as optional Zoom meetings, and
Okay.
a number of students would not attend for a variety of reasons. And it came up in the student survey as well. Some of them didn't attend because the timing didn't work out. Some didn't attend because it was optional. And they said that they would prefer it was mandatory.
Okay.
Some teachers had Zoom sessions as office hours. So if students didn't recognize they needed help, or if they didn't feel they needed help, they didn't attend. So that would also be counted as 0 times that their teachers were connecting with them. So I think it was more structured at the elementary level as morning meetings and social times for students. And at the junior high level, it was more optional as office hours, or if you need help, I'm available at this time.
Okay.
And Joel, Wesley, to your point, I mean, I can tell you firsthand, my daughter had a couple of those optionals, and I made her attend those. So,
I would have too.
And she was sometimes the only person there. So,
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
See, and that's not the way. That's helpful, because it's not the way that I initially read it. It's not. I was looking at it as like the teachers didn't hold class, but that's not. It's that the students didn't go,
right,
or chose not to. Yeah. Okay. That's very different.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you.
Things that the parents felt went well during remote learning are the Zoom meetings that were for socializing. The distribution of the iPads was very helpful. Daily meetings at the elementary level to set the day's structure or schedule. And a lot of parents felt that the pre-recorded teacher videos were very helpful for students to understand lessons. The challenges that were mentioned by a number of parents was being able to motivate their students to do the work, which was also something mentioned by students as well. The students were able to self-recognize that they weren't motivated or engaged to do work on a regular basis. Parents felt that there wasn't really actual teaching or learning happening. It felt more like busy work, which was another thing also mentioned by students. There was too much parent oversight required with the work, and so parents who were working at home or who were essential workers were struggling with being able to balance work and helping students with their academics. And then juggling different accounts, pages, sign-ons, locations of materials, that was a challenge for families as well as the limited interactive connections. We also surveyed the staff. And so what you see here, the staff survey was released on Friday, May 22nd as well. And as of Friday, June 12th, 88 staff members had responded to the survey. We have about 150 certified staff members. Here you see where you see a breakout of their role, as well as a breakout of what they teach. And things that went well, that the staff feel went well. A number of staff members mentioned connecting with students via Zoom, including a number of staff members met with students individually or in small groups to provide direct instruction. They feel that went well. The grade level collaboration that happened across the district, and a lot of staff members mentioned an increase in their technological skills that they feel will be transferred to in-person learning as well. Challenges for our staff members included connecting with students and families who were disengaged. Differentiating for all of our different student levels and abilities was a challenge. Addressing the progress of our students, being able to assess it and then address our students' progress, And students not being able to print from their Chromebooks was another challenge that was mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
From a tech standpoint, our approach was, once the closure was announced, that we really needed to have a better idea of what the level of connectivity was at home for our families. We also wanted to make sure that before that last day of school, when on that last Friday, that all the kids that did have were part of the one-to-one program in grades 5 through 8 did take home their devices and their chargers. And then really the next phase just went into, we realized we're going to need some level of a virtual meeting platform in order to support remote learning. So we're going to have to go through and vet different options there, and then look at the other group of students that didn't have devices, or we didn't distribute devices to them because they weren't part of our formal one-to-one program. You go to the next one. Yeah. So in looking at our level of connectivity, we did have some information in our student information system based on registration data, but we identified that there were some gaps because not all parents filled that out the last registration period. So we did put out a survey to those parents that had not provided the information initially at registration. And then we also had a subset that we still didn't get a response from. So principals and secretaries called families, reached out to them to get that information. And in looking at the level of connectivity, I mean, the high-speed connection, very strong, 94%, and with a very small fraction of smartphone browser access or mobile hotspot connection. And I know principals also had reached out to, if we still had, where they had said they had zero connection, they were reaching out, we were going to provide them a hotspot if needed. In terms of tech resources, we wanted to, again, ensure that the kids in grade 5 through 8 went home with the devices on that very last day of school that was in session here at the schools. And then the following week, on March 16th, that's when we began the distribution of Chromebooks at the elementary schools for grades 3 and 4. At the same time, over a period of a couple of weeks, we vetted Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meets. None of them were perfect at the time. I would say all of them have made changes to their platforms since then. Obviously, we went with Zoom. It took a couple of weeks to get it in place, but our goal was to have it in place before the end of spring break, so that beginning upon the return of spring break, teachers and students had access to the platform. So we rolled out the Zoom services to staff and students, and to student devices, the applications that were needed. And then on April 8th, leading up to April 8th, we prepared the iPads for grades 1 and 2 for distribution. Again, that was done at the elementary school starting on April 8th. With kindergarten, it was a little trickier because we didn't have, because there's multiple sections of kindergarten, AM and PM, students are sharing devices. So we don't have a true one-to-one. They're one-to-one when they're in school, but we don't have enough to give to all students. So what we did is we put out a survey to all the kindergarten parents and asked, whether or not if they needed a device. And so we were able to fulfill every single request for a device for kindergarten, and we had those distributed on April 15th. So near the end of the year, we had to come to a decision on, are we going to collect the devices? So a decision was made to collect only devices that were distributed to students K1 and 2, so all the iPads, and in grades 5 through 8. And 5 through 8, those Chromebooks are at grade levels where those students are transitioning out of the school. Obviously, 8th graders are leaving, So we want to get those devices. Fifth graders are going from their elementary to the junior high. They're going to get new devices at the start of the year. So we wanted to make sure that we recouped as many devices as we could, so we had them ready for the start of next year for the next grade levels that are coming up. So we began collecting the 8th grade devices as part of Hauser's 8th grade collection day. That was on March 27th. And then the following 2 weeks, in that first week of June, is when we did a staggered approach to collecting the other grade levels. Thus far, and this is as of last Friday, of the 763 devices that we had sent home, we've got 670 them back, so about 88%. And we know which devices we haven't gotten back, and we'll continue to contact parents to try to retrieve as many as possible. And as far as the platform, while Zoom has many services offered free resources, that's going to change. And so we're looking at all our options again for staff and students to leverage a virtual meeting space.
Don, may I ask a question?
Sure.
For the device, and we're going to give our parents and students as much time as possible to return their devices.
Mm-hmm.
Are we thinking about more rigorous attempts to collect as we approach the beginning of the new school year? Or has that not come up yet?
No, it hasn't come up yet. You know, we do have, because we do have 8th grade devices that were being cycled out, that, you know, since the 8th graders are returning those, we do have a volume of spares that we're getting ready that we can distribute if needed, okay? But we couldn't have supported all of the devices with just the 8th grade. So getting as many back as possible, it just puts us in a better position for the start of next year. We can get those devices ready, and at the time when, you know, at the start of the school year, even if it has to happen then, we, you know, it has a lesser impact on the start of the school year. And being at 88, 90%, I think, especially for it being June 17th, we still have plenty of time, and I'm sure our numbers will probably get closer to the mid 90s. So we should be in really good shape.
Don, this is would you mind just letting us know at the next board meeting where we are with the collection of devices?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I know Jim is going to talk about the financial impact. That was a question that the board had some questions about also. So Jim is somewhere on the Zoom screen, I believe.
Yep, I'm ready.
Okay.
I listed a few things that happened since the pandemic started on the positive side, and some of the negative impacts and some of the neutral. It helped our construction timing, and we haven't spent overtime that we had budgeted, hadn't had a need for it. We've got our custodians doing a lot of work that was normally outsourced. They've been very flexible and washing windows and getting some of the painting done at Hauser, which is really the school that we have the most access to. We had our maintenance technician follow one of the contractors around that switches the boilers over to the air conditioning, so that hopefully that's something we can do in-house next year. So we're trying to take advantage of this extra time we have. Of course, we've had to spend more on cleaning supplies, masks, and technology. And of course, we can't rent our gym out to the Parks and Rec, and there was a little bit of income that would come from that. And we have paid all the salaries and the wages and stipends that were planned for this year. And there hasn't been a huge plus or minus. There's a lot of offsets there. The biggest concern, I'd say, looking forward is, first of all, it's hard to predict. So now there's, you know, a wider range of variability. This coming year, we believe the revenues will be stable. There's the tax revenue is already set. There may be delays in people being able to pay their tax bills, but it should come eventually. The expenditures could go several ways depending on how we have to handle what are the rules for opening up in the fall. Is it, can we only have half as many students in a classroom, and will we need more paraprofessionals to help us, or it's a hard one to predict, but I think once we know what the rules are, we can plan for it. And when I talk about the budget in a little while, I can tell you how we're handling the revenues going forward. Any questions on this?
And Jim may have it in his revenues also, but we're also going to be, receiving some of the federal CARES money. We're estimating it to be about $150,000 for next year. And the idea is that that would make up for certain gaps, whether that's need to purchase PPE for staff and students. We've talked about some additional ways to support staff through professional development, possibly even additional services for children. So we're in the process of evaluating that also. We also then wanted to just shift gears and talk about the potential reopening. And there are different scenarios out there right now. I mean, I think as we know from our governor and from the state, it's possible that we would be in a continuation of remote learning for the start of next year. It's possible that all children could be ordered back to school with health precautions in place. I don't think that's the most likely scenario. I think what is potentially the most likely scenario is what we refer to as kind of a hybrid model, where we would be bringing children back to school in smaller groups with a lot more physical distancing in place, a lot more precautions. So we're looking at all scenarios. We're going to talk a little bit about that here as we kind of shift from a look back to a looking ahead. And I know Pam has been really our main point person in terms of her contact with our own school nurses, but also with the Illinois Department of Public Health and with the CDC guidance. So we're all following that carefully. But again, as I said, Pam is really our local expert on that. So I'm going to turn it over to her to talk about the health and safety considerations with a possible reopening.
So there have been many considerations that we're looking at with the health and safety, and this is sort of a broad lens view of some of the things that we've been talking about. But some of the issues have been possible illness and exposure, as far as that would look, as far as staff and students. We're following Illinois Department of Public Health and CDC guidelines. We're looking at all their incoming information all the time regarding cleaning and disinfecting protocols, working with Jim and his team with that. PPE, face coverings and face shields. We've talked about masks, how we're going to be handling masks for students if in the event that we will still be wearing those, which at this point we kind of assume will be taking place. Possibly also looking at the purchase of a face shield, especially with their younger students. They're our kindergarten students, our preschool students coming to school for the first time and facing a teacher with a mask, to have a face shield that may be standing even further back that they would be able to wear, and then put up the mask as well too, so they can see their teacher for young ones. We're working with the nurses on screening for symptoms, looking at that as staff and students enter the building. The physical distancing, which we talked about in the classroom, and how many students can we have in a classroom. Taking all those pieces of consideration, and hand hygiene, continuing to look at hygiene. Some of the things we've also talked about is when students do come in and staff as they enter and exit, looking at those traffic flow patterns, making sure that not too many people are coming in at one time, that we're able to screen them as they come in. Also, some of the things we've talked about are student access to lockers and their cubbies with their belongings. We don't want things touching one another if they are kept in the hall. We haven't determined if they will be kept in the hall or if students will be carrying their personal belongings with them. We want to make sure that there is safe access, and determine what that safe access would look like to water fountains. I don't know if you've been places yourself, but water fountains are typically off off limits right now for people to use water fountains. I assume that will continue. There is some access that people are talking about, the ability to use the water bottle filters, which it's wonderful that we did replace our water fountains a few years ago with the water bottle filler, so that would be helpful. Lunch is another topic. You know, there's questions, do kids come to school, stay in their classroom and eat lunch in their classroom, or what does it look like? How many students can we move to the lunchroom if we are able to do that? And another thing that we have really talked about too with the nurses is isolation rooms for potentially infected individuals, be that staff or students. We do not want someone who is sick necessarily going to the nurse's office. We want to have a separate isolation room and keep it at a location where students or staff then are not spreading contaminants throughout the building. So a lot of considerations that we've been taking into place regarding health and safety, with more to come, and we'll continue to follow Department of Public Health and the CDC.
Just a quick question, Pam, on the last slide. You talk about the lockers and the cubbies. What's the concern with the lockers exactly?
I think the concern would be with the lockers, and it depends more information that we get, but we don't want students standing in close proximity of their lockers, one next to one another. So we would have to look at how belongings are being brought in and where they're being stored during the classroom time. I don't know if some of you have experienced it even, but in going to grocery stores, if you're a person who's used to bringing in your reusable grocery bags, many grocery stores are not letting you bring those in because you're bringing in something from your home and putting it into that space. So those are just some of the considerations. We don't have any true guidance on that at this time, but those are things that we will continue to follow up with.
Thank you.
Pam, if there's one thing else I could add sort of on that slide regarding the PPE. I'm sure you're looking at this, but I guess in regards to education and how to use PPE, because I mean, I've worked in a hospital, so I know how to use a lot, like the base, like gloves and face masks. But I've noticed, I mean, when I don't go out much, but when I've been out, and not everyone's wearing PPE appropriately or using it appropriately.
Right. Our staff, through the online training that we do every year, they do for our bloodborne pathogens training, they do know how to remove the gloves appropriately. Will children be in gloves? Probably not. I don't know yet. And we do have a concern about, you know, even staff, when you take it off, that how you dispose and take it off. And we do have the concern of little ones. Are they going to be fussing with the mask more and contaminating more, you know? So those are all things that we will have to explore as we learn more. And there will probably be, if we are in person, there's going to be a lot of training for our students as well as our staff. And we'll just
add to that training piece, that online training that Pam spoke of for the bloodborne pathogens, there will be online training through that same program on PPE and other COVID-19 related scenarios for schools.
Thank you.
I
So
want to talk about instructional. Thank you.
Yep. Instructional considerations moving forward as we look forward. We're looking at 3 scenarios. So not having direct guidance yet from the state and from IDPH and ISB, we are building out 3 different scenarios. We may be instructed or may look at continuing remote learning with improvements, utilizing our data from our staff, student, and parent surveys to improve remote learning. We may be looking at a hybrid of remote learning and returning to in-person instruction, or we may be looking at a full return to school with health and safety precautions. We have developed a COVID-19 transition team. It's made up of administrators and teachers covering a number of grade levels and subject areas, and has equal representation among the buildings. And through this transition team, we'll explore these 3 scenarios and the different pieces that need to happen if we're in scenario A, B, or C. One of the challenges that was mentioned for a number of families was the struggle with instructional items being located in a number of places. And our teachers and students struggle with not being able to directly communicate with each other as well, because our students don't have email addresses. This was also a concern mentioned by families too, the inability of teachers to send information directly to their students, having to go through parents to get information to students if they weren't using Google Classroom. So that highlighted a need that as a district, we had already been looking at for the past few years. As a district, we've been researching the right learning management system to house our instructional lessons, resources, and assessments, and different programs. And so what the remote learning period did was highlight another need for a learning management system. So we are researching a few learning management systems, and believe we found a learning management system that will meet our needs as a school. And so we're working towards the implementation of a new learning management system to house everything in one location for families and students. Another challenge during remote learning was the ability to assess our students and look at their growth over the course of the remote learning period. Again, as a district, this is something that we've spent a number of years looking for. We've been looking for a data management system tool that would assist with managing our different pieces of data, but also including the ability to have house common assessments that teachers can distribute to students through that data management system. So working off of the searching that has been done in previous years, we do feel that we found a data management system that will allow us to be able to manage our different pieces of data, but also allow us to provide different assessments for students. And the nice thing about what we're looking at between the learning management system and the data management system is that they interact with each other and also interact with PowerSchool. So it's all part of a system that we're already familiar with. And then as we look forward to instructional considerations, we want to look at the instructional content and delivery. Should we be in a hybrid model, or should we continue with remote learning? We know that the work we did in these past 10 weeks was appropriate for a time of emergency learning. However, we know that should we return in August to a hybrid or to in-person instruction, we have to make some adjustments. So the transition team will be exploring some baseline guidelines for student instruction, assessment, and grading, because we want to work towards that inconsistency that was mentioned in the student and parent surveys. We know we'll need to increase our synchronous or our real-time instruction, but we also know that we're going to have to provide recorded lessons as well, because not all of our families can jump on a virtual lesson at 9 o'clock in the morning. We have families that stated in the survey that sometimes they're doing their work at night when their parents came home from working. Sometimes they were trying to do it before their parents started working. So there isn't that set time that works for everybody. So while we want to work to increase the virtual instruction and instructing on new material, we know that we'll have to provide those lessons for our students in some type of recorded fashion as well. We know we're going to need to have a more hands-on approach with our students so that we can ensure they're understanding the lessons being taught. We're going to need to continue to develop engaging lessons and activities that reinforce the concepts being taught so that our students are engaged and are motivated to learn in a remote environment. We're going to we need to work on student support, and part of that will be examining our teacher accessibility. And then as we work on our teacher support, including professional development with topics that the teachers have self-identified, which include whatever virtual system we're using. You know, Don mentioned earlier that we are exploring the Zoom platform as well as other platforms. And so whatever platform we land with, we need to make sure our teachers have professional development and best use practices with that. We'll have professional development in the use of the learning management system, as well as the various software that we have available, like WeVideo, Seesaw, Flipgrid, and a number of other pieces. And then we know that we need to provide support for both our teachers and our students with social emotional learning, with the lessons and the foundational work as we return to any of these scenarios. Students mentioning they were the situation was stressful or overwhelming. Students mentioning that they missed their friends and they weren't engaged. All of those things will need to be addressed if we are remote or hybrid. And if we return in person, there's a level of social emotional that needs to be attended to as well because of the missing closure at the end of this school year.
Thanks, Angela. Any questions about the I mean, this is really, well, it's all important, right? Health and safety is key and critical, but the instructional piece of this, we know that ensuring student learning is critical in whichever scenario we are faced with or we move forward with.
Do we know at this point if you'll be giving the MAP tests in the fall?
No, so we're not sure how we're going to do it. Jeff, we do know that we need to assess our students and we need to find out where we're at as a baseline for this fall. NWA MAP is working on guidelines for remote proctoring of the MAP assessment should schools return to remote. They're having a number of professional development opportunities in the upcoming months on that, so I'll be attending those. But if we do it and how we do it is yet to be determined based on what they're coming out with.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions about the instructional piece or any part of it? If not, I just want to share that there's a challenge obviously in doing this and doing this right, doing this well. The challenge is also just around information and decision making. So we know that we are part of the Restore Illinois, the phases, and that the phases also incorporate when students or what size groups of students might return to school or could return to school. We have been eagerly waiting for State Board of Ed guidance. They've talked about the third week in June, so we're thinking it could come any day now in terms of the updated guidance for students possibly returning to school. We know that there's going to be some local work, so we are convening this COVID-19 transition team. Actually, the state is urging local districts to convene these teams of teachers and large comprehensive teams of everybody working in the educational system to put together planning for all of that. We're obviously looking at, as everybody has touched on, the technology needs, the instructional needs, looking at needing to make some purchases and make some financial decisions without fully knowing necessarily if we are going to be more remote or more of a hybrid. I think the ideal, as we know, is returning back to normal, but I think everybody has a sense that that could be a while. I think what's interesting is there could be a moment where this is a local decision, right? Where the state sets up some parameters and some guidelines for us, and then they let local districts decide. I think the real challenge in that, and you all know that I've been meeting regularly with our West 40, which is the West Cook County 40 school districts in our area, the importance of a coordinated response, right? So if, let's say, we were to open, but Berwyn were to stay closed, or LaGrange 105 or something were to, do the opposite of what we do, not only does it, it's challenging for what we're saying students are ready for or not ready for when we're really in essentially overlapping communities. But also we know that our staff have their own children in schools in these other area school districts, et cetera. So childcare is a real issue, not just for our staff to come back to work. We also know childcare is a huge issue for all of our families too, that we know that public education and education in general provides a service to families that's we're not built around childcare as our model. It's around student learning, but we do allow parents to go off to work and know that their children are safe and well cared for. So there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle, but certainly I know it's this has been kind of a long evening meeting, but if there are other comments or thoughts that the board wants to share, I think it's really important to understand kind of where people are. I know we're all hearing from the community, reading a lot of information, articles, resources that are out there. It is still an ambiguous situation.
I'll just say from what I've heard, I don't have any additional comments or questions, but just from what I've heard, I think this hits on a lot of the questions that I've been asked or feedback that I've heard. Just a tremendous amount of variables here, a lot of work put into all these different hypotheticals for ultimately something that could be completely outside of our control. But even a couple of things here that I hadn't even really thought of like lunch, hadn't really crossed my mind. But yeah, you're throwing a whole bunch of kids in a room and spit on each other and touching each other. Yeah, it seems like so far it's pretty comprehensive on what you guys have thought through and are trying to figure out solutions to. So no additional feedback on other things to look at from my vantage point.
The one thing I would say is that from just on Martha's last point, I think Martha was basically alluding or explaining that if there's not a coordinated approach to how schools are going to handle reopening in the fall, if the schools are not all on the same page, it's going to be chaotic for the reasons that Martha said. So I would think that, I don't know, obviously as a local school board, we have very little influence, but I think the message that we should be sending to the state is do not let local school districts handle this on their own. There should be a coordinated statewide effort, because absent that, you're just going to have a chaotic mismatch, which would be very hard to, for the reasons that Martha mentioned, to actually make it work. So that would be, I think, the one thing as a school board, I think we could say to our state representatives and the state governor is that, hey, this needs to be a state level response, not just letting all the schools decide on their own.
No,
Yeah, completely agree.
I completely agree with you on that, Jeff. I mean, we've seen what a lack of a coordinated response at a national level has done to all these states, and how this is not an effective way. It has to be a coordinated response, and I completely agree with that.
And I was gonna say, even if it's coordinated, as we've talked about regionally, right? Because we're hearing from people in central or southern Illinois that they have, plenty of space and are maybe low enrollment, and they don't have good technology, and the connectivity issues are problematic, and they want desperately to bring their kids back into school. We want very much to have our kids back in school too, but our issues are different. But I think even if it was coordinated, as again, regionally would make a lot of sense to me. I think even this West Cook area, we're very overlapping and tightly, connected around feeder districts, neighboring districts where our own staff have children attending, et cetera. So I agree. And if people want to share that message with the governor or state representatives, I think that is important.
I think the key thing here, and I'm sure you're well aware of this, I guess, as we get closer to the new school year opening and we get an idea about which avenue we're pursuing. So definitely we want to communicate that with the public as much as possible, but also with an eye towards, I think it was mentioned that what we've done this past year was an emergency learning environment, that we want to look to a school year where we're identifying some of the issues that have come up in the past 10 weeks and looking to improve upon things, and whatever model we end up with, that we're looking for ways to improve the experience across the board for students, teachers, and families. Martha, I think you're on mute.
I was gonna say, I know we have a couple more agenda items if there aren't other questions.
I think we can move forward.
All right. And get my.
And my agenda, it says draft 1 budget. Is that up to date?
I think that's it. We're not seeing your screen yet, though.
I have to stop my sharing. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I didn't put any slides together for this. I just wanted to hit some of the points that are in the report that you have. And this is the first draft of the FY21 budget, and we'll do several drafts. But there's been input on this draft from every administrator. And at this point, except for the construction spending that'll still be going on throughout the summer and probably into September, it's a balanced budget aside from that. So the plan is to refine it and present a second draft at the July board meeting. And then we can make more updates and refine it again, and planning to have the budget hearing and adoption at the August board meeting. And so going into the budget a little bit is on the revenue side, as we kind of mentioned a little earlier, there's this one-time federal grant of CARES money, and our district will get about $150,000. that'll be handled through Title I. So that will come in after July. And the biggest piece on the revenue side is the property taxes. 87% of all our revenue is property taxes. So in this draft, we've been very conservative. Normally, we'd budget a 2% increase from one year to the next, depending on inflation. And we had a 1.9% and a 2.3. So easy number would be a 2% increase if it was a normal year. Instead, we're budgeting a 1% decrease. And that 3% swing is about $1 million on the revenue side that not there, and hopefully will come in and it will exceed the revenue budget. So that I went back to see how in 2008 and actually March 16th, 2008, Bear Stearns basically went out of business. So that was, to me, a trigger. That's the one thing I remember happening. And then this year was around March 16th that we really all became aware of what's happening. So I tried to map using that as a template, what happened after that in the next couple of years. So that's why we decided to go and plan on getting a lot less revenue. It should come eventually. It's just going to be timing. But there will be appeals, and if an appeal goes against us, that money is lost for that year. Future years, it's spread out over all the tax base. So this will have the biggest impact on our budget and on our projections in the future. So I wanted to point that out to you. On the expenditure side, this budget has, this first draft has a 2.8% increase in all expenditures. And most of that's, salaries, wages, benefits. And I use 2% on the miscellaneous expenses. And the FTE report that you have, the second attachment, I took what was in our audit for the past 6 or 7 years and tried to show how that would change going forward. And the FTE, the full-time equivalent employees, is basically flat from how this year is going to end, how last year ended, how this year is going to end, and the budget going forward. So we're not adding or removing positions from the budget. However, out of those 247 FTE, there's about 7 that the hiring is on hold. Till we see what the fall is going to be like, what positions we need. These are positions that we are not advertising yet, that we don't have plans to fill, but we're able to keep them in the budget and still balance. That's almost $500,000, $462,000 there that we won't be spending unless we need to. And if there's any questions so far, and then we've got a couple months where we can refine this, and hopefully we'll have more information about how the fall is going to go.
Okay. Jim, was there anything to say on the stipend process? You had that as a bullet as well?
I think I'm going to let Martha answer that. That's I put all the stipends in the budget, all the ones we have this year. Whether we're going to have them or not next year, they're in the budget.
Yeah. So Jim had pulled out from the budget. It's a significant component, a relatively significant component of our budget. I know Jim had shared that. I know a lot of people thought, well, we weren't in school, maybe we weren't paying stipends this past spring. There actually was a formal joint agreement that required us to still pay teachers their full stipends for this past year, the March, April, May timeframe that is now passed. We have notified the Riverside Education Council, and they're in agreement with us that if we're not in school and not able to do, whether it's the before and after school supervision, the lunch supervision, but also all of the co-curriculars, clubs, and activities, that we would not be, we've provided notice that we would not be paying those if we're not able to provide for those, provide those for students. We actually have had a few teachers already reach out and say, if we're in remote, could we possibly do the school play on Zoom or some other things? So we will certainly look at those creative opportunities if we feel that they would benefit our students. But again, it's kind of a unique area in the budget, and there's been some unique consideration with the idea of remote or back in person schooling and what impact that would have.
Okay. I hope I didn't drag us off topic then. So did anyone have any questions in regards to the budget?
And Dan, we weren't off topic just because Jim had listed as a component of the budget. So I just wanted people to have an understanding of how that could fluctuate depending on the school enrollment issues.
Okay.
It's on topic.
I guess I don't really have a question, but more of a comment that Jim, I appreciate the thoughtfulness that has gone into this and sort of the way you've been planning this and being very cautious about the expenses and expenditures and revenues coming in. I very much appreciate that.
Thanks, Dave. That's definitely a great point to bring up. All right. Anything else in regards to the budget? Shall we move on to Facility Advisory Committee?
So Joel is still physically present at the meeting. We're doing some technology troubleshooting. So Joel, if you don't mind, I'll take it, or you can speak loudly enough that maybe you'll be heard on. Maybe he's ready to connect back in, but I'll get us started. So we had shared the agenda. We had a Facilities Advisory Committee on June 8th. So thanks to Linda and Joel for joining us again. And I think we feel like, oh, we're in the midst of construction. What more do we need to talk about? But there are a number of things. And in particular, we had a fairly lengthy presentation from the Lakota Group in Galt Hamilton about some, what I would call almost preliminary design ideas for the Central Hauser campus around doing more to separate play and parking and improve student safety and improve the outdoor play opportunities for children at both Central and at Hauser. So that was fairly significant. We're going to do some informal communication with the village to make sure that some of these design ideas are on track from the impact they may have on the traffic in the area, et cetera. And then we would look forward to bringing it back for a more formal presentation. Perhaps the August COW might be a perfect time to do that if we can work through those dates with the Lakota Group and Galt Hamilton. But I think there's some great ideas that are emerging, and again, want some more time to kind of think them through, and really appreciate the committee process and looking at those. And Joel, are you up and running now? Do you want to add other comments about that?
I am. Sorry about that. The biggest, all of the board members were provided with the 3 options, but please note that those are conceptual and they need to be run through both the village, the fire department, the traffic, because there were some suggestions as to street changes with regards to the number of lanes and parking. And then also, as you know, we went through some rigorous discussion with the village planning and zoning. So some of the plans would affect how our land is used as well. And so those would need some additional village approvals. Also, there have been some discussion about what exactly the green space would be composed of, artificial turf or grass, or some method to keep landscaped material intact during inclement weather, and none of those have been decided yet. So that is still to be determined. But as Martha said, there's been a rigorous discussion on the part of the consulting group as to how to best provide better space and better play space plus that separation of play and parking.
Joel, do you want to comment on the additional landscaping for Ames was something that
I can continue to go through the rest of the agenda. Sorry, I wasn't quite sure. Another item at Ames is, as you know, the play area, the playground, borders a residential property. Suggestions have been made to provide some kind of landscaping, which means taller shrubs, trees. I can't quite remember which species the landscape architect is remembering. I think it is arborvitae, but I could only think of viburnum. So we're looking to plant something along that edge. There was some suggestion that Ames PTA could perhaps be involved, but that doesn't really seem like an item that would give them enough visibility, and perhaps they're looking for something more in the center area of the site. As you know, we're still under discussion about what exactly can be done at Ames, and the board has had a vigorous and good debate about what a potential lease could look like. So that's still very much up in the air, and we're looking to engage with Hollywood House in finishing that out somehow. Finally, there are items on the, and I don't, Martha, if you want to jump in, you can. There's some repair items that need to happen. One is that the Blythe Park parking lot is in pretty rough condition, so there's going to be a proposal for repair and replacement there. We have been discussing the Hauser sound and light for the auditorium, the speaker system and the lighting. That is not an insubstantial investment, much more than just it's much more involved, more electronics, more equipment. And then there are some maintenance and repair items at the district office, including some exterior painting that we'd like to do just to bring it up to a good a basic level of I'm not thinking of my words right now, I apologize. Appearance, best practices.
And I know, Joel, you said Ames, but you meant Hollywood, and then you said the HCA, but just on round.
Yes.
Agenda number 4.
Sorry about that.
No, just to make sure it's clear. And I think it was as the conversation went on. But the other thing is, in terms of that additional landscaping at Ames, the projected cost to do those additional bushes and some natural grasses would be $8,000 to $10,000. So that is something that if the board's comfortable with that, we could use that discretionary money that's set up through the facilities agreements as kind of part of an ancillary project while they're on site, that they could get that done. That would be my recommendation if the board is comfortable with that. It doesn't need to be a formal action because it's a $8,000 to $10,000 item, but if people would like a more formal proposal, we could certainly bring that back for consideration also.
Does anyone have thoughts on that?
Actually, I attended the zoning and planning committee for the initial designs and everything. I don't know that we need a formal proposal, but it was interesting that it came up from their perspective as well of like, how's that visually going to impact the neighbors and everything. So I don't see how we don't do it, I guess.
Wesley's correct. It acts as a screen between the school and the residents on that east side. Previously, there were some large trees out there that kind of screened the school, so this would be at least getting closer to something that's not so school-ish for their view shed.
I would agree with Wesley. I mean, I think we and Joel, I think we need to should do this, but I don't think we need I personally do not need a formal presentation for that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's the landscaping, I think, really makes the sort of the space cohesive and desirable, I think, for the kids, both visually and, in terms of shade and so forth. So I think I agree with what people are saying, that we should do it. I would say that in addition to the arborvitae along the border, which are just kind of a screen, I do think it would be a good thing to plant a few trees that will eventually become larger shade trees up in the grassy area, so that, over time, those can provide shade for the kids that just want to, rest in the shade, basically, rather than running around. So I think it'd be good to do that. And that's not a very expensive thing to do.
For people, sounds like there's comfort level then with using that discretionary spending and the bushes, the grasses, and maybe looking at what it would cost to add some trees to that.
Yes.
Great.
For me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you. And Dan, I know that's the last item, and I would be remiss if I didn't take a minute and just interject. I hope you don't mind, on the agenda. I know when you voted on the contract, I had to make sure that the vote passed first. But anyway, I want to just say thank you to the Board of Education for the opportunity of the past 4 years, and looking forward to an opportunity for another 5 years. And again, this is just a tremendous district. It is really what I had wanted when I thought about being a superintendent, in terms of just really working in a very engaged community. All of you, the work you all do, but the work that all of our parents do, and just a tremendous staff and a wonderful group of administrators, leaders that I really consider my close colleagues, and certainly wonderful children. So again, thank you for that opportunity, and thank you for the approval of a future contract.
Yeah, again, thanks to you, Martha. You do great work. We definitely look forward to continuing working with you, and the district will be better for it.
Yes, agreed.
Okay. Which brings us to public comment. Is there any public comment out there today?
Still no one has shown up.
All right. So let's see. If there's no public comment, future meeting dates: July 1st, Committee of the Whole meeting at 7 p.m. I believe we have discussed the potential of canceling this meeting.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was saying, unless the board feels strongly about having a meeting. I know we really kind of added almost a cow item in here by doing the COVID presentation, and we can certainly do that again, provide an update at the regular board meeting in July. I don't know that there's any specific committee presentations. David, we have some policies to talk about, but that could be done at the regular meeting also.
And that's fine with me.
Wes, any thoughts?
I could go either way. If we think we can get it all done without a 3 to 4 hour meeting on the 15th, I'm fine with that.
Well, this will be on the 1st, so July 1st.
Right.
Missing.
So if we miss that one and we can get everything accomplished in one on the 15th and cancel the 1st, I'm fine with that.
I get you. I hear you now. Jeff?
I agree. Yeah, I think if we can avoid, if we can do it all on the 15th, we should do so.
Okay. Joel?
Yes, in favor of the 15th.
All right. Yeah, I think we should note as well that typically the board in the past has canceled a committee of the whole meetings over the summer. So this is not really a deviation from past practice. Okay. So in that case, committee of the whole meeting on July 1st will be canceled. July 15th is a regular business meeting, 7 p.m. The board will enter into closed session at 6:30 p.m. if necessary, returning to open session at 7. And that's all I have on the agenda here for tonight. So if there is nothing else, the meeting is adjourned.